So Tav Dalad Amid Base. So even in Gemara, that Rabbi Yehuda, he was holding that lav shein b'maisa, loimer litein asa acharlota selamar shein loiken alav divrei Rabbi Yehuda. So how does he learn it out? The Gemara says that we learn it out through a sada shava. Malem zonim shechein ein tzrichin hasra machi shemer yochiach v'hozer adin. So we have the sada shava that even though it's a lav shein b'maisa, you get makos. It's not like each other. So you have a lav, even though there's no maaseh, you get makos. That's the shittas of Rabbi Yehuda. Afkol lav shein b'maisa, like in a lav, you get like in a lav. So mal tzara shehen kanas. So then you have that there a kanas. Halo kasha Rabbi Yehuda lo saver like Rabbi Akiva. So since Rabbi Yehuda doesn't hold like Rabbi Akiva, there's no pirka on the tzara shava, and therefore his tzara shava works. So there's a common denominator, as they call it. So since he has his common denominator, if he was Rabbi Akiva, he wouldn't have the common denominator. Therefore, Rabbi Yehuda here is arguing. He says, Lo saver la Rabbi Akiva. He's not holding like Rabbi Akiva. Therefore, Rabbi Akiva will hold the opposite of Rabbi Yehuda. And Rabbi Akiva will hold that lav shein b'maisa loiken alav. So Tosfos halo kasha, Rabbi Yehuda lo saver like Rabbi Akiva. The Amar Eidim Zomimim Kanasahus. Rabbi Akiva holds that Eidim Zomimim is a kanas. So therefore, he has the pircha in the tzara shava. Therefore, he can't learn out that lav shein b'maisa loiken alav. So Rabbi Akiva is now holding lav shein b'maisa loiken ein loiken alav. If you don't have a maisa, you don't get makos. So mashma hakal Rabbi Akiva the islay to Eidim Zomimim kanas. Since he holds that Eidim Zomimim is a kanas, he doesn't have lav shein b'maisa loiken alav. So you don't get makos according to Rabbi Akiva. If you do a maisa, if the lav doesn't have a maisa, you don't get makos according to Rabbi Akiva. The lo matzi yalef mehaydina, because the way that Rabbi Yehuda learns that you get makos for a lav shein b'maisa, Rabbi Akiva can't learn that way because he holds Eidim Zomimim is a kanas, whereas Rabbi Yehuda holds it's not a kanas, so therefore he can learn it out. So now Tosfos has a kasha. The kasha that Rabbi Akiva oimer. So Rabbi Akiva later on says, "Makayim kalayim bekerem loike." So Tosfos here says that if you keep the kalayim in your kerem, you get makos. So when you find the seed, the thing that's growing in your kerem, that's not supposed to be growing there, you just leave it there. So it's a lav she'ein b'maisa. The have lav she'ein b'maisa. So why here is Rabbi Akiva getting makos for it? Says Tosfos. So he's arguing on the Oroch. So Tosfos says you have to have a maaseh. Since Rabbi Akiva will not give you makos unless there's a maaseh, so therefore Tosfos brings up that there's a maaseh for the kalayim. The kalayim means that you built a fence around the kalayim. That's how you have the maaseh of Makayim the kalayim. But according to the Aruch, you don't need a maaseh, and it's enough to just leave it be, even though it's Rabbi Akiva. So what's the maklokus between Tosfos and the Aruch? So the Rambam in Hilchos Chometz Umatza. Again, what's the pshat in a lav she'ein b'maisa, ein loiken a lav? If you don't do a maisa, you don't get makos. That's what it means, no?
Yeah.
But it doesn't. But we'll see. Ein loike mishum. So, ein loike mishum lo yireh v'lo yimotza. So bali yireh, bali motza, you don't get makos because there's no maisa for it. Eile im kein kana chametz v'pesach. So kana chametz v'pesach is a maisa that you will be over lo yireh the bali yireh bali motza because you're doing a maisa. But if you don't do a maisa, so you don't get makos. I mean, it's posher. In here, it's the same avera bali yireh bali motza, and if you do that avera with a maisa, like you kaineh chametz v'pesach, then you get makos. And if you don't do a maisa on that same lav, you don't get makos. It's posher. That's how everybody would learn lav shein b'maisa. Or chimsu kadei sheyaseh bo maisa, where he did the chametz, he made it chametz, so like he did something to it to make it chametz. So kadei sheyaseh bo maisa, that's where you get the makos. Ein loika until you hit sheis bo maisa. Aval im haylo chametz koydem a pesach. Uba pesach v'lo bioro, so he didn't do the maisa. Ela heniach b'rushu, so afal pi she'avaros shnei lavim ein loikem in a toira mipnei shelo aseh bo maisa. You still get makos margis, but we're not interested in that right now. We're just looking at what is this getter of lav shein b'maisa. You have to do a maisa. It's the same avera. Get the maisa, you don't get the maisa. Posha. That's how everybody would learn a lav shein b'maisa. So the Rambam in Sechirot, he deals with the lav of chasima, which is where your animal is dosh. It's treading in the wheat in order to create the kernels separate from the klipas. And while you're doing that, you muzzle the animal. So it's a lav that you get makos for. But here the Rambam says, chasima afilu chamsa b'kol loika. Even if you do chasima with a voice, you get makos. So here you have the Magid Mishma. Afilu chamsa b'kol, you get makos. So this is the maklokas Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish. And he's poskening like Rabbi Yochanan. And it's that's also the halacha. And the reason the Gemara is because when you move the moving of your lips, that's the maaseh. So even though it's a dibur is not a maaseh. Here, moving your lips is a maaseh. So all the Mefarshim ask the question on how can you posken this way when we say that kol lav shem b'maaseh ain't loikin lav. That's the halacha. Any maaseh, any lav that doesn't have a maaseh, you don't get makos. But we have a chutz minishba umeimar umakalalas chavero. And why are they singled out? B'shem alma de imakim savarim lo havi maaseh. So all these lavs she'ain bo maaseh, you don't get makos except for nishba. Nishba you do. But that's an exception, therefore it doesn't have a maaseh, since it doesn't have a maaseh, but that's dibur. So therefore, how can we posken in chasima that kol is a maaseh, but here it's not. So we're posken in also the same way. We're saying kol lav shem b'maaseh, and then kalalas chavero is a dibur that doesn't have a maaseh, and nishba doesn't have a maaseh. So the psak is master each other. So the tema ech psak shteihem. How can you do both of them? So the ikar is we can say that the kimsafayim chasima is a maaseh. The Magid Mishnah is saying here that it's not that dibur is a maaseh or dibur is not a maaseh. What he's saying here is that the moving of the lips of the chasima is a maaseh here because his dibur will come to the klal of maaseh, will come into actually being a maaseh. So by him talking, if he klals his friend, or he kalals Hashem, he says, I don't like God. So there, nothing comes out of his dibur. So his dibur is not a maaseh. However, he shouts at his behema to not eat the food, and the shouting of the behema stops the behema eating the food. There's a maaseh that comes out of his dibur. The maaseh, the animal didn't eat the food. So therefore, here you have the dibur creating the maaseh. So some diburs come to maaseh, and some diburs don't come to maaseh. So the diburs that come to maaseh is called a maaseh, and the diburs that don't come to maaseh is not a maaseh. Which again is a interesting way to see when is dibur maaseh and when dibur isn't. So that's the first answer of the Magid Mishnah up to maaseh kemo shekasav. However, the Magid Mishnah gives a second teretz which is more pertinent to our sugya. The efshar hayali loymar. So now we have the chiddush of the Magid Mishnah. Shekol lav she'ein bo maaseh. Sorry, she'i efshar bo maaseh. So any lav that's impossible to have a maaseh. Eila dibur. But the only way that you can have the lav is through the dibur. She'ein a dibur kri maaseh. Then the dibur is not called a maaseh b'chlal, because it's not going to come to the ba klal ha-maaseh. V'chasima, keven sheyeshna b'maaseh gomor. So there is called a chasima with a maaseh. There's two ways to do chasima. There's a chasima with a maaseh, where you take a muzzle and you stick it on the behema or the dog or whatever, and you have a voice, you're shouting at the dog, or you're shouting at the behema, and then you have a chasima through the call. Af chasima b'kol hi k'maaseh. So the Magid Mishnah is splitting lavim into two sets. You have a set that cannot be done with a maaseh, and a lav that can be done with a maaseh. And therefore, since chasima can be done with a proper maaseh of putting the muzzle, a maaseh gomor, even the chasima b'kol, when you do the same lav without a maaseh, have a maaseh. That's called a maaseh. The afal pi shehevi gemara kan raya ledevarav Rabbi Yochanan meimar mikol shekain ka maaseh lav etzarech lachach shebezeh besugyas gemara. So the way he's explaining why to get makos for chasimas b'kol. Why is there makos for chasimas b'kol? Because there's two types of lavim. There's a lav she'ein bo maaseh. You cannot do the lav with a maaseh. Let's say a mekalel Hashem or mekalel your friend. The only way that you can do that is with dibur, and there's no maaseh there. So since you have the lav that doesn't have a maaseh, therefore there's no makos for that. However, there's a second set of lav that can be done with a maaseh. And even though sometimes you do it without a maaseh, but since it can be done with a maaseh, every time you do it, even without a maaseh, that's so called a lav sheyesh bo maaseh, and you get makos. So it's not the idea that you have a lav. If you do it with a maaseh, you get makos. If you do it without a maaseh, you don't get makos. But there's two types of lavs. One lav is impossible to do with a maaseh, And one lav, sometimes you can do it with a maaseh, sometimes you can do it without a maaseh. And those type of lavim, you're always going to get makos. Okay, so here we have the chinuch, Ramah, which is shelo lenakum, the famous sefer chinuch that don't have nakama. Why shouldn't you have nakama? He says everything's from God, and the guy came and punched you in the face. So don't feel bad to this guy who punched you in the face, because you are deserving. God wants to punch you in the face, and this guy who punched you in the face is just an emissary of God, and therefore you should only have a kursatov to this Eliyahu type figure who punched you in the face, and having nakama means you're koi for all that. So in the Dinei HaMitzvah, Ketzarim, just a quick din of the Mitzvah. Kavar Zacharnu Mahu Lefi Mahen Lefin Hanira. So he's already explained a few of them. But no Heges B'Kol Makim B'Kol Zman B'Zacharim V'Nekemis. V'Oiver Aleya V'Keva B'Lav LeSoineh Chavero. So don't hate your friend al shaharalo. So you hate him to the point where you come to actually do bad to him. Achi Glenu Karaso, that you do back to him like the bad he did to you. So that's how you're over al lavzeh. And your v'rasos rabbin, it's a great evil to do this. Ki hu siba letakala maruba, because you'll come to many issues out of hating your friend so much. You're actually going to come and do this. Aval ein loiken al lavzeh, but you don't get makas on this lav of nakama lefi she'ein by maaseh, because you don't have a maaseh. Now this is really the mirror image of what the Mגיד Mishnah was saying. What's he saying? There's no maaseh. If a guy comes and punches you in the face, then you'll be over shalot linakem if you go to him and you punch him in the face. Is that law a maaseh? What are you talking about? So there's a klal zeh yeh biyadecha. Have this in your hand. But kol malchim shenemor lav she'ein ba maaseh ein loiken alav. Every time it says that, you remember what the chinuch is saying. He did a maaseh, ain't like an alav, mipnei ken. You're not like it honest because of this. Since it's possible to be over the lav without a maaseh, therefore, even if you do that lav with a maaseh, and you don't get makos. Remember that for all of them, ki davar boror, it's clear, ain't circle shanot b'mokum acher. I don't need to repeat it or tell you again another some other place because it's so clear. So now we have, with the Mגיד Mishnah, and we have the Sefer Chinuch. We both have in both of them. We have Averas where you can do the Avera with a maaseh, or you can do an Avera without the maaseh. According to the Mגיד Mishnah, those Averas get makos. According to the Sefer Chinuch, those Averas don't get makos. So according to the Mגיד Mishnah, the fact that you can do it with a maaseh is machriya on even the times you do it without a maaseh, that you still get makos for those. On the Sefer Chinuch, it goes the other way and says the fact that you can do it without a maaseh is machriya on the times that you do it with a maaseh, that you don't get makos for those. So the Mגיד Mishnah and the Sefer Chinuch are crossing over there. So now we have this maklokis between, it's really a maklokis in the Rambam, the Mגיד Mishnah on one side, and the Mגיד Mishnah and the Sefer Chinuch on the other side. And the way we say would be is the lav she'ein ba maaseh, when the Torah tells you that you don't get makos for it because there's no maaseh or whatever it is the maaseh a simon or a siba? Is the maaseh a simon that you get makos? It's just a identifier. It's a correlation. It's something to point out to you that you get makos, or it is a siba. It's the reason why you get makos. So in the Rambam, that since if you do the maaseh with if you do the lav with a maaseh, you get makos. If you do it without, you don't. So therefore, it's a siba. The makos, the maaseh is a siba. The maaseh is causing you to get the makos. Therefore, if you don't have the maaseh, you don't have the makos. If you don't have the maaseh, you don't have the makos, because the makos causes it. And the simon is just showing you that what is this avera? This avera is an avera that either gets makos or doesn't get makos. So therefore, this avera always has the same din. So the way the Maggid will learn, that since you can do it with a maaseh, therefore it's a simon that you always get a makos for this avera. The chinuch will learn that since you can do it without a maaseh, it's a simon that this lav never gets makos. Again, in the chinuch and the Magid Mishnah, that the indication, the fact that, so Magid will say this, the fact that I can do this lav with a maaseh is an indication the Torah is telling me. Therefore, this lav gets makos. I did it without a maaseh. The Torah's already told me that I get makos for it. Therefore, even if I do it without, it doesn't matter because it's not my maaseh that causes me to get makos or not. It's the fact that it can be done with a maaseh tells me what type of lav this is. We have different types of lavs. Lavs you get makos for, and lavs you don't get makos for. Then the fact that you get makos for this, or it's the fact that you can do this avera with a maaseh, it shows me that this avera, this lav, gets makos, and therefore even if I do it without a maaseh, I still get makos. The chinuch will learn that since you can do this maaseh without. You can do this lav without a maaseh, therefore it's telling me that this is the lav that's in the category of not getting makos, and therefore even if I do this avera with a maaseh, I still don't get makos for it. Now plugging this back in, here we have the Oruch, Ainu Shemeniach, so Tosfos is holding like Rambam. Tosfos can't hold by the Oruch. Because he says, we have it's a lav shein b'maaseh. Right, so therefore you have to do the maaseh, says Tosfos. What's the maaseh? Maaseh you have to do. Hainu shas hakeder, so if you have a climb, you have to do the maaseh. The Tosfos is holding, you have to do the maaseh in order to be oiv, in order to get makos. You have to do the maaseh. I don't care what the lav is. Now they're discussing the same lav. The lav is the lav of kalayim. So therefore if we learn this like the Magid Mishnah, that since kalayim can be done by making a fence, like Tosfos says maaseh, and it can be done without a maaseh, like just leaving it at the end of your field when you find that some stuff's growing there, you shouldn't do it, and you left it there. That's without a maaseh. So therefore, this is a law that can be done both ways. Since it can be done both ways, so the Magid Mishnah will hold you get makos, and the chinuch will say you don't get makos. So therefore, the Oruch will be holding like the Magid Mishnah that you get makos even though there's a lav shein b'maaseh. Why? Because it's a giloy in the fact that you can do kalayim with a maaseh. Therefore, it's a giloy that this is a lav, that this lav gets makos even if you do it without a maaseh. And Tosfos is going like Rambam and saying no. If you do the maaseh, you get makos. If you don't do the maaseh, you don't get makos. Now that's all nice and dandy and kind of makes it kind of clear, and everybody's in their own box. However, we're not going to do this. But if you go further in the Achronim, then they put the Magid Mishnah as like the Rambam, and they put the Chinuch like the Rambam, and they both mefarshim on the Rambam, and then you kind of, so the Magid Mishnah is just like a sect of the Rambam, and then the Chinuch is also a sect of the Rambam, and then actually everyone's saying the same thing, but we're not going to get into that. But basically the issue is that there's steerers, there's lots of lavs. With maasehs you get makos, and live maasehs you don't get makos, all these type of stuff, so put them all together. You have to say like sometimes it's like this, sometimes, and then find shitas that fit them all in. So it's not all black and white like I want to present it, but there is a benefit of presenting it as black and white, because then everything fits really nicely in its box. But lemaisa, these are ways of learning lav shein b'maaseh. And they just have to be refined in order to fit every case. But the idea of Sibin Simon and the fact that you have that even though you don't do the maaseh, you don't get makos. I mean, I think that's a big chiddush in the limud, but it's clear at the learning. And I don't know who would be more poshet, the Magid Mishnah or the chinuch. The chinuch would definitely be, the friend who's saving everyone from makos. But I don't know.